So, a few weeks ago, I talked about the Red Sox trade deadline and, of course, all the big moves they made. Now, you can't argue that the biggest name that they moved was John Lester, of course, but kind of forgotten in that whole mix is John Lackey, a pitcher who, in a very short time, kind of made a polarizing impact on the Red Sox fan base as a whole. So, I mean, going back to 2010, I was a fan of the John Lackey signing, but like a lot of people, it kind of came out of left field for me. I really wasn't sure if they needed him. It was almost kind of like, well, Carl Crawford, but to a lesser degree. They already had, a couple good pitchers. John Lackey, of course, fit into that equation. The thing I was wondering is why John Lackey agreed to come to Boston, being from the West Coast, being, the ace on a team that regularly contended in the Angels. And of course, the Red Sox weren't looking too bad either. But, he joined the Red Sox in 2010. And, it's kind of funny how his expectations changed almost every year he was in Boston. Year one, he was supposed to be, the second or third ace behind Lester and Beckett. So in 2010, he disappointed, even though, he wasn't terrible, but he did have a 4.4 ERA. He won something like 14 or 15 games. He was a decent number three starter, but they paid him pretty much like, number one or number two starter money. Then you go to 2011, and there were so many things wrong with that season. But at least John Lackey was supposed to stabilize the rotation. At least you didn't only have to count on Lester or Beckett, and of course you had that great offense around him. Yeah, that really worked out. So, Lackey was supposed to be another piece of that. But instead he became even worse, and he was just a disappointment start after start after start. He had something like a 6 ERA. He had like the worst ERA in history for somebody who had pitched as many innings as he did in 2011. Now, we come to find out that he needed Tommy John surgery, so he actually kind of gutted things out in 2011. He actually pitched through some pretty severe pain, in a losing effort, but at least he went out there. He wasn't like Buchholz. He wasn't like some of these other pitchers, even Beckett. He gave it his all. He, kept him in games. He even had a winning record, I think, that year, but, terrible ERA. And in 2012, it was, even though he wasn't even really on the team, he was just kind of there. He was getting, abuse from the fans. It was like, why'd we sign John Lackey? He had signed a 5-year deal. And of those 5 years to that point, he really only had 2010, which was an okay year. So in 2013, when he comes back, fans are like, well, what are you going to get from him? If he's okay, maybe this team will be okay. Well, we all know what happened. And to me, that wasn't really that much of a surprise. I ended up rallying around John Lackey in 2013 just because he had been through so much. And because, the expectations from 2010 had dropped so dramatically that people were just happy if Lackey was an okay pitcher. Now we're sitting here saying the same thing about Buchholz. And Buchholz was, ace-like in 2010. He had a 2.3 ERA. And again in 2013, Buchholz was really good. But Lackey was kind of the story as far as, pleasant surprises last year. He was part of that World Series winning team, even pitching in Game 6 of the World Series. To me, a really iconic moment, at least for the short Red Sox career of John Lackey. So, needless to say, I'm a little disappointed to see it end, especially after he kind of, I don't want to say endeared himself, but he turned things around as far as his perception was. People before his injury, before he came back in 2013, people didn't like the fact that he, showed up other players, the fact that he'd get all frustrated when there was an error behind him. But, the guy was human. Okay, he wasn't the best speaker as far as, eloquency went. He wasn't a social guy. He wasn't the first guy you'd think of as, captain of the Red Sox or captain of the pitchers or any of that stuff. But he was there. He was a guy who just chilled with everyone else. And people were just against him, I don't know from day one, but just in 2010 for some of his antics and 2011 for being a bust and, all this other stuff that came out, off the field issues. So, I don't know, I just wanted to kind of reflect on that because it's not too often that you see a fan base as vehement as Boston, hate an athlete like that and really just kind of not want him, trade Lackey, get rid of Lackey. And then they turned around on him, partly because he had a good performance, but he was also different. I don't know what it was. He was one of the guys. He was just kind of, again, and a lot of this was just media perception. As far as the Red Sox, will tell us that, they always got along with John Lackey. He was always kind of a close part of the team. So, again, as much as John Lester, I hated to see him go, I also didn't like to see John Lackey go because he kind of got a bad rap for a couple of years, turned things around, and at the very least, it would have been interesting to see if he came back in 2015, given the option. Now, as it turns out, he'll be on the St. Louis Cardinals for the rest of the year, the team that he beat in the World Series last year, and he'll have a chance to maybe get to another World Series, and I wish him and Lester the best. John Lackey, as a Red Sox fan, I can say I appreciated the few years of service you had as a member of the Boston Red Sox. I never really gave up on you. I always thought you were a decent pitcher at the very least, and obviously you defied your critics in 2013 and even this year, so I love that. So, for better or worse, John Lackey was a key member of last year's team. He will be missed. This is Bobby Gaines, Red Sox fan, signing out.